73.1 years is the last statistic for life expectancy according to the World Health Organization. It's probably not completely accurate, but regardless of the accuracy of the assessment, that is the general time frame of a human life at the time I'm living in. Historically, there's always been rough estimates and observations recorded by scholars and historians, but these were not systematic or widely reliable as they are now. And while a majority of history has a lot of missing data or unrecorded events, my time has endless data, and almost every single major or minor event is captured, and sort of immortalized through the commentary and frequent repeated retellings of it. That's not to say we've advanced in the information itself. For example, I was told all throughout my childhood that we're going to face a population crisis. Now, as an adult, we are facing a birthing crisis. It's more so that we have the tools to see almost any information we want to, if we want to. I'd give examples, but you know exactly what I mean. What comes with this is the ever-present opportunity to see things you would likely be better off without knowing. How hot dogs are made, how much plastic is found in the food we eat, the truth behind quote-unquote natural flavors, but also things regarding mortality. I can read what are the most common killers in my time. I can read ahead and see how we're all likely going to die. I can see what is likely going to be my death. This knowledge I view as a curse. I don't want it. I don't want to know about it. I don't even want to know that I can know about it, because I think there is some knowledge the human mind was not supposed to adjust to or not equipped to deal with. It's like seeing spoilers for a book you're enjoying, except it's not a book, it's your life, and then you have to carry the spoilers around until you live them out. And it doesn't just have to be mortality. I remember distinctly being in class one day discussing artificial intelligence, and I thought in the future whether it would become normal in day-to-day life, and wondered whether I would think about this very moment of introspection of that future while living it out. It was weird, it felt out of time, it felt surreal in a way that hasn't been written about yet. I slowly saw that future happen, and now it's just normal. And now I think about that moment a lot, and I wonder whether I will feel that way on my deathbed, looking back at this moment of introspection about my death. I don't want to get the idea across before I present my idea that I in any way romanticize nature or love it or think that it's some sort of inherent good that we serve. Nature is cruel, vicious, beautiful, and chaotic. It is cyclical but changing, harmonious but disruptive. It is a living contradiction that somehow all fits together. It is not something I adore or admire or hate or despise. It's more complex than that, and our collective response is more complex as well. Most of routine modern life is about ignoring our inner nature, for better or worse, and choosing to be better than it. Our natural inclination is towards high-calorie foods, rich in sugars and fats, which were historically scarce and valuable. However, modern life often requires us to consciously choose healthier options and portion control to maintain health and prevent diseases like obesity and diabetes. Rather than getting mad at things that upset us, we've learnt emotional regulation to control ourselves when faced with obstacles. Moving beyond that, most of our history is about changing the environment around us in supposedly unnatural ways to be more beneficial towards us. All settlements, transportation, and surveillance has been done to navigate and build off nature. Nature is something we put up with, wrestle with, admire, and change. We have to become harmonious with it, despite the unharmonious world we inhabit. We don't hide from nature or ignore it, it's just we selectively choose to ignore certain parts of it or focus on others. When most people think of the word nature, it's lush green fields and forests, loud animals and savannas, but probably not harsh windstorms, forest fires, and animal-on-animal savagery, the lust and hunger that forces nature to rip itself apart so that it can rebuild, the type of savagery that we only accept because it's natural. It's nature. In my country of Australia, there's a lot of beautiful wildlife, and because I live pretty much on the edge of a forest, I see a lot of it, particularly birds, one of the most prominent being cockatoos, and from a young age I observed that they travelled in flocks, or like a family. Honestly, behaviourally, they mirror us in a lot of different ways. Cockatoos mate for their entire lives with just one partner. They stay in tight-knit groups, they are highly social, they can dance. And how long do cockatoos live on average? 60 years. 60 years on average spent hunting, gathering, nesting, and dancing. 60 years where a cockatoo and another cockatoo love each other till the end. I was also told not to feed the cockatoos as a child, and of course I fed them. Look at them, they're just so cute. I liked cockatoos because I felt a unique relation to them in their life, their emotive behaviors. Despite the lines between species, there's a harmony in how we both react to the ever-changing world around us in similar ways. Often in language, when describing emotion, we act as if it's a uniquely human trait, or at least treat it as such within our descriptions, as if dancing and laughing and crying and empathizing is something exclusive to us. But from my childhood, I always saw my own emotions in animals. And it's not just that, we also exclude things. When we look at cruelty, we describe it as inhuman, as if cruelty is not a part of our nature or we are somehow above it, as if it's something outside side of what it means to be human. And by describing cruelty as inhuman, we create a psychological separation between ourselves and the cruelty we see.
Ladies and gentlemen, the smoke and the flames now, and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the...
The more terrifying reality is, of course, that it's not inhuman. It is as much a part of us as everything else. And by describing it as this other, this defiance to accept it as a part of ourselves, I think we get a psychological reading of how humanity perceives itself, or at least likes to perceive itself. We'd like to think of ourselves as above our cruelty. We'd like to think of ourselves as separate from the common nature, as if we are different from it, cut from a different cloth. It's not a refusal, or like when someone won't admit that they have bad breath. I think it's something deeper than that. It's the opposite of fear or shame. I think it's ambition and a deeply seated, unprecedentedly important and untouched motivation and drive. It's this desire to be more than nature. Not just exclude the unattractive sides of it, but to be no longer wrestling with it, no longer compromising with it, with adjustments, to be better than it, exceed it. The eternal conquest of man, individually and at a wider species level, to be more than the conditions and instincts that forge him and he is limited by, to transcend mere adaptation and become in control of the environment we are adapting to shape the environment rather than be shaped by it. You see this in macro ways in history, from the rise through the food chain to controlling agriculture, urbanization, dams and water management, to micro things we don't even think about, like controlling temperature or artificial lighting. Early humans didn't just adapt to cold or darkness, they learned to control fire. Instead of growing fur, we killed and shaved animals for their fur. We didn't just adapt, we saw opportunities and took it. Intellectually, it is seeing reality for what it could be rather than what it is. This, I confess, is the dividing gap between me and my feathery friends. They will never in their current state of evolution reach this level of critical thinking. They can't make fire, they just adapt, they react, they feel things, but they don't know why they do. Great dancers though. I'm not saying that man making fire was a declaration of stubbornness against nature defining him. He could have just been playing with sticks and happened upon something. I'm not trying to make a mythology about mankind right now. But a wider observation can be made that throughout history, man has done everything but just play the cards he's been dealt with. We are not a content animal. We haven't even stuck to the same playground. We blasted off the fucker to see what's out there. We're always reaching for something, optimizing something, streamlining something, exploring something. An existentially restless animal. Why are we restless? Did we have too much coffee? No. It's related to what I was talking about before. It's this need to be in control, combined with dealing with knowledge you wish you didn't have, combined with something you can't control. The assumed only fact, the only thing that seems, as far as we know, uncontrollable, the weight around everyone's heads all the time, in the senses, in our fears, in our understanding, in our knowledge. The race we're always going to lose, the preservation of the unpreservable. A large majority of art is about it. Most instincts try and warn against it or prevent it. There is a shadow over every achievement we make. It's the certainty of ending. It haunts man. We can conquer everything around us, we can adapt to almost every environment, but we can't change our own limited time. It is the ultimate thing we have to come to terms with, and it does not help that its time frame is so uncertain. While recording this very voice line, I could have a heart attack. Or it could be in 50 years, or it could not be a heart attack at all. I just have this vague certainty that it will happen at some point, in some form, and that will be that, and there's nothing I can do about it, because humanity finally met its match. The one thing we can't conquer, our own bodies, our own selves. Except maybe we can. It is not a new idea to try and prevent biting the bullet, but it is hard to surmise what is and isn't a conscious attempt at doing so within a lifespan. For example, there are a million micro decisions we do mostly subconsciously that are preserving ourselves, and technically a conscious decision to extend our lives for longer. Eating healthy, or eating in the first place, getting water, obeying and fulfilling our bodily needs like sleep and rest, psychological needs like connection, and complex ones like autonomy, recognition, and stress-free living. And there are more subconscious macro ones like not walking in front of a speeding car. That is a form of preventing the inevitable, that we usually don't even think about because our instincts are backseat driving us to not even really properly consider them. Prolonging life is a weird concept to write about because almost everything we do is prolonging life. It's more obvious when it's a negative, unhealthy lifestyle that's actively shortening it, like a bad diet or smoking or excessively drinking alcohol, living in isolation, not getting enough sleep, suffering mentally and not trying to get help or improve your situation, which will, if not treated, sometimes in a very minor way, slowly kill us, shaving off time we could have. Then there is the societal conscious effort to prolong life through infrastructure and facilities, medicine, water systems, housing, human rights, laws of safety, and many ethical systems. I really dislike doing summary sections I have to get through to lead to my actual point, but making infrastructure to prolong life is getting closer to the real meat and potatoes of what I'm going to talk about, because it is building off our instincts rather than just listening to them, accommodating them through complex systems to the point where they become fulfilled without the expectancy that they won't. And many changes that we sort of take for granted, like plumbing and accessibility to food and water, took centuries of planning and trying different systems, and sadly are still only developed in certain parts of the world. And as another part, we are constantly optimizing. Through these collective efforts over time, we slowly started pushing the expectancy of the average person's lifespan higher and higher. It varies country to country, year to year, but for most of the general data, in the 1700s it was close to 35 years, give or take. And now in most developed countries it's above 50. And with proper care, the average person could probably have a good 70 years of existence. A lot of this data is skewed because infant mortality rates were so high in the past. For example, while the overall average life expectancy was around 35 years, the high infant mortality rate greatly pulled the average down. If you survived childhood, you could typically live much longer. Those who made it past early childhood often lived well beyond 35. Child mortality rates really did not fluctuate much before the 19th and 20th century from society to society, so it can lead to this overall precedent that mortality was much higher than it actually was. But it also does feel incomplete to just wave it away as a child mortality issue. Life expectancy has gotten better generally across every age group, not just child mortality, as our care has gotten better. Records are constantly being broken year to year, and while yes, all of the achievements are wonderful and we're trying slowly to make life a more consistent and safe experience, there is still that glass ceiling, that vague understanding that no matter what we do, we are ruled by our failing body, and what we're really doing is really efficient ways to prolong what is inevitable. We are slowly dying animals, just trying to live a little longer, wishing for ideals we intellectually know we probably can't reach. There have been so many tales and characters and stories in history to do with immortality, to overcome that ceiling and limitation. Gilgamesh, the Chinese 8 immortals, the story of the elixir of life, a promise of an afterlife from various religions. It comforts some, leaves others with envy, others don't try and bother themselves with it. Personally, I don't think we will get to that mythical ideal of immortality, at least not anywhere near this lifetime. That is not what I'm going to talk about. Living indefinitely, however, that sounds much more plausible. You can still die at any point quite easily, but there's no real limit on your lifespan. As science gets better and more advanced and we start doing things like gene sequencing, cell manipulation and synthetic biology, nerve regeneration and a bunch of other terms that we can both pretend we understand fully, the bottom line is previously limiting things about the human condition won't be limited anymore. This may sound like science fiction, but the process has already begun to very mixed and strange results. Quite literally making an organism younger by reversing the age of cells. Now these are incredibly uncharted waters. To make a prediction or an assertion that we know how this is going to play out would be kind of egregious. We don't know the real bottleneck on this, the new limit, or how it'll affect human biology. This is very, very early days. But with that said, we could be at the very beginning of a new type of revolution and a new type of defiance against nature's playbook. Maybe we don't have to go. Maybe humanity gets another trick up their sleeve to rebel against its conditions. But is this actually something we would want? Now, from a first glance, that may seem like a silly question. I just did this whole introduction talking about how humanity's biggest enemy is mortality and life expectancy, and now I'm questioning it. But this is different than just plumbing and eating healthy and quitting a bad diet. Even more complex forms of medicine, like vaccines or organ transplants, don't even come anything close to the amount of control we could be potentially about to tap into. This could be a whole rewriting of how people view the end. The way in which people consolidate and make peace with death has always fascinated me. The primary way I've observed personally in the people around me is, it's kind of like this Aurelius quote: live a good life. If there are gods and they are just, then they will not care how devout you have been, but will welcome you based on the virtues you have lived by. If there are gods, but unjust, then you should not want to worship them. If there are no gods, then you will be gone, but you'll live a noble life that will live on in the memories of your loved ones. Why curse yourself with endless existential questions that don't solve anything and leads to an inherent dissatisfaction when there's no answer? A lot of the big questions have driven some of the most intelligent people mad. You could let the curse of knowledge and mortality and the cruelty of nature and man weigh down on you, or you can carry that weight and realize you're stronger than it. You don't need to carry it. Just live the best life you possibly can so that when your time does come, you can make peace with yourself with how you have lived. But there's another one I have observed en masse as well. It's this sort of quiet bitterness. desperation, an underlying frustration, or dissatisfaction with the whole grand narrative. It's honestly strangely similar to me to the sort of bittersweet acceptance that a lot of people come to when they lose in a competitive game of sport, and then they say, good game when the match is over. You say good game, but deep down, you don't want to say good game because you didn't win. Then it would be a good game. It's acceptance, it's noble, but it's not the preferred outcome. You wanted to win, you didn't, and now you have to make peace with the fact. Because what else is there to do? But be courteous, life goes on. But in this shitty analogy, what happens when we win? What comes after the rush of achieving something as monumental as overcoming the fixed inevitable? Will that sort of bitterness end or become exasperated? How does one navigate an indefinite eternity with death still just one step away, but not guaranteed in any near future? If I was gasping my last breaths and knew deep down that they were my last, the mundane life I've spent my entire life hating would suddenly seem so beautiful in a way I never noticed before. I would kiss the traffic lights I would usually curse at. Those unskippable ads you get would suddenly be super captivating rather than annoying. The scammer who's trying and completely failing to convince me that I've inherited $1 million would suddenly be incredibly charming. The ache in my back, the pang of jealousy, the stubbing of a toe would be a blessing because it reminds me I'm alive. Every bitterness, every regret would be overwhelmed with this beautiful melancholic gratitude that I got to have that regret, that I got to have that bitterness. And that's not even mentioning the good parts, to see really beautiful art and have it cut through the cynicism and the awareness that boardrooms and rewrites and deadlines were done just to make you feel that way, and it touches you so deeply it somehow feels more real than the life surrounding you. To be truly understood by someone, even if it's just for a second, and feel an intimacy more deep than sex or love or passionate hatred, because it is deeper than that. It's the intimacy of being understood. That morning you got up and did a workout and it felt awful would feel amazing. Every menial experience that we pass off would be like a reminder, a beautiful hangover, an energetic sugar crash. Without the percussion of bombs accompanying the hillsides can often seem like blank canvases we overlook. But amidst hellfire, they look like nature's expansive masterpieces. In winter and storms, the sun seems like a dreamlike apparition that we all just collectively hallucinated. In summer, an obstruction that hurts the skin. But to get sunburnt at all in this state would be the deepest honor bestowed upon you, because you still have skin to get burnt. The mundanity of day in, day out typical suburban life seems like the most cruel spiritual death. But in closing, the most joyful, exhilarating, and beautiful thing, the utter privilege it is to have something or someone to lose in the first place. To care enough to hate someone or something, to love someone enough to feel grief. God, what a beautiful thing, to love someone so much that it hurts to lose them, so fragile, so pure, so real. In their absence, the small talk of ones we love that we do on almost autopilot becomes like the most gorgeous monologue ever written, and I'd remember them all, every conversation we had. And in those last moments I would get struck with thoughts that are so soul-crushingly depressing, you're almost glad you never get to share them. That last date where you didn't know it was going to be your last time together, everything you didn't say when you wanted to, all those things you started but never finished that you're just now remembering, those really quiet days where nothing happened, those really loud ones where everything happened, all those people you haven't seen in so long that you won't ever see again. People fixate in culture about last words, but it's so often individualistic and tied to my last words, or the last sentence anyone will ever hear me say. But really, there's almost 1,000 last words we have. We just don't realize it. We're not conscious that this is my last impact on a person. Every person I've ever met would have their own last words with me. Not to mention, as a creative, my work would outlive me. Maybe somebody from the future who's never met me before will stumble on a video or a song of mine and get a brief understanding of who I am from the way I talk or write. To them, these little time capsules, that's my last words. For those last seconds, it's my private movie theater of every thought, action, moment and dream I've ever passed or had, every introspection, every perverted thought, every sin, and I'd forgive myself and hate myself and love myself endlessly, like a tape recorder on repeat. And for that single second, it would be so spiritual and so personal that it would override whatever emotion or neurochemical process happening in my synapses. It wouldn't even feel real because it would be that beautiful. It would be a revelation, not of the mind or ideas or belief, but in spirit. And for that last second, I truly would be an idiot and narcissist for thinking I could ever describe it. If I ever could, if anyone ever could. And then oblivion. When you jump in the cold water and your body reacts, there's something more jolting and terrifying than the icy sensation, and that's emotionally feeling nothing from it. You don't get the endorphin rush, you don't get that feeling of I did it, you get a stark feeling of why did I do that, and that's the killer. Numbness. You get nothing out of numbness. It's so unlike every other experience. Pain, while agonizing, still reminds you of a connection to the body, to emotion, to the self. Happiness, while fleeting, reminds us of why we're alive, what we continue to go on for. Numbness gives nothing, both in lesson and sensation. It disconnects from the body. It doesn't give the mercy of being. It's just a vacuum where emotion should be. It strips away the very essence of feeling alive. Why am I talking about numbness? Because I was just talking about longing for what we can't have. And I think if we could have what we long for, I think we would be numb. I think the bitterness wouldn't have a melancholy. I think the scammer would just be annoying. I think we would rip out the traffic lights we would usually curse at. Who cares there are birds who mate for life? Something perpetual like indefinite life would make that which is not perpetual, the momentary, seem small in comparison. I think as time would go on, we wouldn't be grateful. How many pools can you jump into before you become desensitized to it? Before the jolt of ice becomes kind of predictable? What happens when you've read most books, or rather, you understand them as you read them? You've read so much that the ideas they present or the characters or the plot become stale, intellectually and emotionally. Even niche or esoteric knowledge, once broken down, it's all just remixes of the same common ideas. What happens when you read Lovecraft and the indescribable horror he wrote about becomes just the very opposite, describable? His dramatic effect becomes kind of mundane because you've already thought about it. The curse of knowledge has now become something not just achieved by a high level of intellect and not an unfortunate circumstance at the time you were born in, but a genetic birthright to carry this weight. It's an inevitability. There's no sense of merit to this, or some sense of being more intelligent. It's just a fact that through living indefinitely, you will become more knowledgeable than any previous generation. Instead of you only live once, it becomes you only die once. You just live and live and live and live and live indefinitely. Instead of existential horrors that weigh on our minds like dying before your prime or dying alone or coping with the loss of loved ones, it becomes about things like legacy and finality and perception, what the finale would look like. You know how we cater every bit of our lives to make ourselves seem in control of it? Through things like profiles and resumes and banquets and small talk and self-talk and grind sets and mindsets and astrology and philosophy and math, science, history and unraveling the mystery it all started with the Big Bang? Once death becomes something we can control rather than an inevitability we accept, you bet you're customizable to your preference ass that we're going to personalize it. Death parties, loving someone so much that you want to die together at the same time, that's already a thing actually. You fall in love with so many different people, you meet so many different people, you truly feel like a different person every few decades because you're constantly learning new things. New year, new me, try new century, new me. That old quote, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, well, what if you never become the old dog, mentally and physically? Every insecurity you've ever had about your body, you can fix it. Rather than the body being a temple, it becomes like a car or a computer, constantly customizable as much as abstract things like identity. All the quotes and phrases that tie to death and most of philosophy becomes kind of like a window to the past, a spectacle to look at, for wandering eyes wondering how we coped living, knowing day by day that it could just end from. Thoughts are interrupted because you've had them before 700 times. Your dreams are just memories. Your memories feel like dreams because they're so long ago. It feels impossible to remember every day. Your journal is like a new book to read every few decades because there's too much that happens, you forget a lot of it. You speak to some friends so much that you've repeated the same topics over and over again like an inside joke that's worn itself out. When watching the endless commentary on the endless content we watch endlessly as our lives slowly end, it wouldn't have that nagging, what am I doing with my life feeling, because you have so much life to live. Every TV show in existence is on your binge list. Imagine feeling isolated in your own mortality. In the same vein millennials and Gen Z have, I should have figured out my life by now, you have this weird feeling of, I really should have died by now. Reaching the age your parents died and then doubling it. I'm sure through doing this we've adjusted our neurochemistry somehow so that this perpetual cycle isn't somehow soul-breaking. The hedonistic treadmill has changed now. It has some rocket boosters, some refreshments as you jog. It also has no time limit now. This allows you to reach pits of despair that just weren't possible yet. The really traumatic moments stand out like a sore thumb, even more so than before. You remember all your heartbreaks and you dream about them sometimes. It's like you're living that part of your life again. And you feel a sense of accomplishment and true inner peace that no one yet blissfully felt. Doing a backflip on your 100th birthday like you're in your 20s because from a physical standpoint you pretty much are 20. Seeing your great-great-great-grandkids developing century lasting bonds with people. You plant seeds and live long enough to see them grow old and be in their shade, but you don't grow old with them. It's not that you feel less human, as I surmised on a different occasion, it's that you feel differently human, because the entire definition of what is human has changed fundamentally. From this comes so many different questions a man should really never dare ask. 1. Is it really the point of life to indefinitely live? Is that what we've always really been driving for? 2. If someone chose to opt out at age 500, is that even considered taking yourself out anymore? Or is that just, I don't know, I had a good run, bye guys. 3. Did I waste a large portion of my life making a video that essentially boils down to, life isn't as fun on creative mode? Maybe. We shall see. And 4. Could we as a species begin to feel envious of those who came before us? Not in an aesthetic way or an emo, I was born in the wrong generation way, but in a spiritual or intellectual way. Could we miss primitiveness? Could we miss wondering without endless knowledge? Could we miss not knowing? A spiritual envy at the more authentic and seemingly more simple human life at an earlier time of creation. Similar to how a Marxist talks about the means of production, we could talk about the spiritual means of one's own perfected and automated body, and how they feel robbed of true nature in all of its chaos and beauty. Even right now, I already mentioned I feel slightly envious of cockatoos, their simplicity in emotions and lifestyle, and in a societal context, I honestly feel envious of explorers and ancient thinkers who got to actually discover things for the first time. When Descartes has an existential crisis and questions everything about the nature of reality, he's called a genius, the lucky motherfucker, but when I do it, it's almost boring and cliche. Because everyone has already asked the big questions and explored all the major landmarks, and you're just left in this indefinite monologue as the middle child in history after we conquered nature and explored it, but just before we fundamentally changed nature and went beyond it. I'm aware this video may seem to flip-flop between praising the natural in conjunction with the idea of progress, and then demonizing it the next minute, viewing future medicine as a fix for the inevitable or some form of postmodern salvation. But in my defense, I think that's exactly what the future of this conversation is going to look like. Recognizing how cruel, how awful, or to put it more plainly, what the flying fuck, but also recognizing maybe perfecting the body and environment until everything is comfortable will ruin the utter essence that drives man in the first place. This is a strange comparison, but I couldn't stop thinking about it while writing. Growing up, I was the youngest in my pretty big family, so I got all the hand-me-down stuff. All the clothes, all the technology, and my favorite, all the games. Which was great because I could bypass a lot of restrictions other kids would have with parental ratings and limited access to what they could watch or play. I never had to actually beg my parents to get most games, because chances were we already had it in our collection because my brothers had already begged my parents for them. I could play a lot of games I otherwise wouldn't. I just rummaged around as a kid, picking up random discs in our family's collection and seeing whatever the game was. This varied in quality from Mario Kart to Lego Star Wars to titles I never would have tried had I not stumbled upon them, like XCOM or Darwinia, which I'm very grateful for. It was like a slot machine every time seeing what game I got, and I loved it. The most special moment was discovering Skyrim for the first time. 7-year-old me playing Skyrim, no internet, barely any life experience, probably shouldn't be playing Skyrim at that time, but oh my god, I have so many distinct memories of coming across different landmarks and vistas and that beautiful soundtrack kicking in and truly feeling something beyond myself. I couldn't articulate it then, but it just made me believe in something beyond the life I was living, beyond my understanding of what life is. For some it's Narnia or Lord of the Rings or Warhammer, but it's that first taste of fantasy that makes you truly believe you're somewhere else, or you're experiencing something else. There's something out there, waiting to be discovered, if only you went out searching for it. And I genuinely think ever since that game came into my life at just the right moment, I've been chasing that in so many games and pieces of art after it, and it disappoints me almost every time. It even slowly failed in Skyrim. The sort of magic wore away when I got older because I slowly saw cracks in the game's story and gameplay loop. It became less an immersive experience and more a rollercoaster ride of predictable things I've seen. It became an anomaly to be surprised rather than an expectancy, because everything about the game became an expectancy. And yet, I restart Skyrim like every 2 years knowing this. Deep down, I don't actually want to play Skyrim again. I want to have that feeling of playing Skyrim again. I don't actually want to feel nostalgia, I want to feel the wonder. And the sinking feeling that produces nostalgia is that I know I can't get that back. I want to jump in the cold water and I want to feel that satisfaction of having pushed myself to do something uncomfortable afterwards. I don't want to feel the numbness of asking myself why I need to push myself. This is going to sound, for a lack of a better word, hippy-dippy, but there's this psychological concept and state known as being institutionalized. It's when prison inmates, who for a long duration of being incarcerated, feel bonded and attached to their prison. They feel that life outside the prison can't provide a feeling of comfort like the prison does. The prison itself could be abusive, torturous, or isolating, but they will stick with it, because after such a long time with it, it's all they know. If you thought I made a bold assertion last time, or wait till you hear this one. Could humanity and man have been institutionalized by reality itself? Or rather, the reality and body you grew into. We just accept nature's cruelty because it's so innate to us. If we actually looked around and processed without the idea of normalcy all of its brutality, we would be actively horrified. This would not just be a guttural reaction like when we see a dead bird on a walk or an animal eating another, or seeing someone we care about slowly lose themselves with cancer or dementia and get briefly reminded on how awful life can be and then just continuing on, passively enduring it because this is how it is, this is all it is, this is how it is always going to be. Always feeling intelligent enough to picture a better world, but never intelligent enough to achieve it, and left with this vague soup of worries and never-ending unresolved feelings of, maybe this is it, but this isn't how it should be. What if instead of that, or stoically accepting death or making peace with it, we rebelled against it? We don't accept the natural, we decide to be better than the fate which binds us. To do this, we need to start writing philosophy that goes beyond the conception of what our limits are. If we really are to do this, we need to start viewing humanity as a question mark, rather than a definitive full stop. So essentially, going with this silly metaphor, we've started to see the cracks in the game design of life, and we've just discovered we can add in mods. Have you ever heard someone talk about something and they say something really profound, but they keep talking and eventually they lose the plot of what they were saying, but what they were originally talking about was so good and intriguing, they keep trying to circle back, but they keep failing to capture that same magic? I feel like that emotionally sometimes. Similar to how we listen to romantic music to relate to the feeling of love, or sad sentimental music to feel comforted in the blues. Intellectually and spiritually, I try to find something that can relate to how I feel about this dawning era of rapid change to humanity itself. And I am left, much like everything in this time, in complete disarray and confused how we got here. We're all aware of these feelings, but we're looking for someone to accurately express it, that combination of words that give that understanding and clarity at least a crumb of it. I think the most intelligent thing I've written about the modern era is, the methods of adaptation we implement are quickly being made obsolete by how fast the technology we are adapting to changes. They become outdated almost as soon as they're established. This perpetual state of flux leads to feelings of existential disorientation. When we're kids, we view teenagers as so much more mature, and then we become teenagers and we view adults the same way. Then we become adults and realize, oh fuck, everyone's just winging it. I had a similar revelation with a lot of the writers, thinkers, and speakers I grew up admiring when I tried looking for some sort of answer to transhumanism, mortality, and uncertain futures. No matter how much I read or studied, they never really comforted me, and this very particular dread never really got explained in words. And I love philosophy, the 1,000-year dick measuring contest of who had the hardest bar. But hearing centuries-old dead people have similar existential crises to me, except it's in a more intellectual way, doesn't fulfill me like it used to. It was much better learning about it in my early teenage years, because I was coming to terms with who I am and how to deal with being and meeting the relatable day-to-day challenges. It's not as good for future answers, and dealing with things to do with an uncertain future. And also, much like my Skyrim analogy, it felt so much more fulfilling when I first started reading, when I first was reading the discourses, when I first traced back lines of thinkers' history and saw how they all influenced each other, when I first majorly read up on theology, when it wasn't just repeated lines of thinking you've already thought or read about. As a student, I would read every philosophy book I could get my hands on, and I had a slow burn realization that honestly hurt me more than the idea of dying. That some people, some incredibly intelligent genius people, everyone I looked up to, never truly came to terms with it either, and they're just like I am, just a lot better at writing about it. The fact that great thinkers also grappled with the same fears without resolving them went from being a comforting, shared experience to an indescribable source of disappointment. I jumped from book to book, philosophy to philosophy, this subtle lie I didn't even realize I was telling myself, that if I read enough, studied enough, if I threw myself into different lines of thinking, it might provide a final answer or solace, and it never did, and really I just got a bunch of badass one-liners I know now. It's the dread I felt watching my dog get euthanized in front of me when I was 13, understanding that this is better than her continuing living in pain, but the logic not in any way consolidating me. I didn't want to hear the scientific explanation. I didn't want to hear that she was in a better place. I didn't want to hear that I might see her in the afterlife. I just wanted to be with her again, and I couldn't, and nothing could console me. If I was to be vulnerable for a second, I think that's what I'm always driving for as a writer. I want to write something so comforting that no matter what despair or grief someone's going through, they feel comforted. That's what I've always wanted, my expression being so powerful it divides the context of its perception. I'll never get there, but without that goal in mind when I start to write, I'd never get anywhere. My instincts are primitive, my environment is alien, and my surrounding landscapes are still so beautiful. I feel like the middle child of history in more ways than one. I'm aware it may seem hypocritical to talk about nostalgia and use products and especially media to talk about nostalgia, when I'm the guy who ranted for an hour about how media is alienating us from our own humanity. But it's often missed out on how culturally generations and even empires and societies are widely remembered for their aesthetics more than how they lived. When people think of ancient Egypt, they often imagine pyramids, pharaohs, and hieroglyphs, the grand symbols of the civilization. But few people consider the daily lives of ordinary Egyptians, farmers, craftsmen, or merchants who lived beside the Nile. The focus is often on the monumental and the mystical rather than the mundane. Does anybody, aside from history buffs, remember the daily life of an average Roman? No. Do people remember the Spartans? Yes. How many people remember the Battle of Thermopylae as 300 because of the movie 300? The iconography begins mattering a lot more than the actual reality. What do I remember about being 7? Sure as shit not all of the random events I was forced to attend to because nobody could babysit me. It was Skyrim and playing with Legos and having my first crush. What do I remember about school? Everything that wasn't the daily ritual. I remember when a teacher accidentally threw a clock at a student's head. I remember wondering whether I was going to remember remembering this. I remember thinking a lot of this was outdated and needed a rework. What do I remember about making these videos? It's definitely not the sleepless nights of trying to come up with one sentence. Those little edits that probably no one will see, wondering what the hell I'm doing, whether this line works, whether this part is going on too long. It all blurs together. But what I do remember is that single satisfying feeling at the end when I can look at my work and say, I'm finished. It's that one little compliment saying that I in one small way made them think or look at something differently, or I made them feel something. That's what I remember. I can demonize it all I want. Humanity in this age will be remembered for our media and technology. The human experience has become transhuman, and we're just at the very beginning of that. Personally, I feel isolated and out of time. I feel promised a life I'll never live. It's strange, my entire childhood is built on a system that's about to change. My biology itself is likely going to change at a rapid rate, with no way to slow down, or no goal, or guidepost in sight. Have you ever heard of the ship of Theseus? It's a thought experiment which questions authenticity and categorization. Essentially it asks, if a ship is rotting away and the parts are replaced over time to keep up appearances and hold shape, is it still the ship of Theseus? If every single part of the original ship is slowly replaced until none are left, is it really the ship of Theseus, or an entirely new ship that's just identical to the previous one? It has a paradoxical nature about it. If you agree that it's entirely new ship, well, when did it become that and stop being the ship of Theseus? When the first new wooden plank was placed, or when the last original was replaced? Or is it more of a general idea that, okay, at a certain point it's no longer the ship of Theseus? If you wanted to be incredibly decisive and frankly nerdy about it, you could even surmise that there is a constant change happening in every object, second to second, through environmental effects, an ever-constant, hard-to-notice but ever-present butterfly effect. The constant erosion and change of everything is microscopic and slow to observe the effect of, but it is still there. Is the wear and tear through weather not fundamentally changing the ship of Theseus? Sure, it's not as noticeable as replacing the planks, but it is changing it. My point is, the ship of Theseus when it was first constructed is different to the end of its first voyage, not to mention its last, regardless of the potential replacement. The little scratches, the harsh winds, the sea pushing and pulling against the boat endlessly on loop. Over time, the boat forms a new identity through scars and damages. It's not a different boat. It's just a different ship of Theseus. If you wanted to be more loose with it, which is the typical response of the thought experiment, you could say that it's the ship and resemblance that makes the ship of Theseus the ship of Theseus. As long as it has the same material, is called the ship of Theseus, and captures its shape, by all intent and purposes, it's the ship of Theseus. Again, the iconography begins mattering a lot more than the actual reality. I think this paradox is a good gander into the future conversations of transhumanism. Does the actual shape we take matter if the memory and consciousness is still there? If I'm just a brain in a box, am I still human? If someone bit by bit replaces my body with the physical qualities that resemble my shape, is it still me? I don't think anyone would make the argument that a burn victim is less human because their skin has no fingerprints, or a replacement heart, or a prosthetic leg. But similarly to the ship of Theseus, at what point do you stop being human? At what point do you start being human? At what point does the ship of Theseus stop being the ship of Theseus? Is being human just an aesthetic? Is being me just an aesthetic? Am I just an outline that can be copied or broken down? If the theory of evolution is correct, then I don't think definitions in the way I've been presenting them are really accurate at all. We are ever-changing, ever-undefined beings. There are commonalities within us and a shared net of traits, DNA, instincts, and genetics, but humanity is a question mark rather than a definitive full stop. There is a constant change happening to us, similar to the scratches and scars of a ship at sea. Except now we're making it more apparent by replacing the ship. Not just polishing the woodwork with fitness schedules, diets, and skincare routines. We're going to manipulate gene expressions, enhance neurochemical effects by controlling them through a brain-computer interface, fully replace limbs, prolong the inevitable end. Not just seeing doctors as we would see a shipwright, but actively becoming ever-presently aware of what's going on in our bodies with real-time statistics. How much sleep did I get last night? What's my blood pressure? How many steps did I take today? What's my heart rate like? If my voice, speaking presently, was a reenactment done by an AI, would it even matter after a point? If it resembles my shape just like the ship of Theseus, hits all the right notes and carries my cadence, would the authenticity of the voice carry any weight? It would be the greatest ego death. They can be a better you than you. The fact you're not the original ceases to matter in the ears who hear it, because as the thought experiment proves, authenticity doesn't matter when presentation is done authentically. The guttural reaction I was talking about, being grateful in the face of losing everything, being indifferent at the monotony over time of losing nothing, would extend to this newfound fruit of inconclusive endings, prolonged everythings, and previously thought impossibly good technology, art, infrastructure, and routine. The intellectual but emotional guttural reaction to constant perfection is a deep, deep, deep longing for imperfection, for the sloppy handwritten handwriting and half-baked ideas and condescending and pointless tribalism over nothing. The pretentiousness of my writing right now. The red flags of humanity would become the mystified green flags in an age of near-perfect infrastructure, one that feels so different from our original design of socializing hunter-gatherers. Traits and behaviors that are so often seen as detrimental might be romanticized or desired in a world that lacks their chaotic and unpredictable vitality. In the same way, everyone in my generation seems to have a deep, undisclosed, vague longing for more authentic connections and experiences coming from their language, imposition, and strange new political fantasies. I think we will reach an existential longing of nostalgia for base emotions, base environment, base bodies, and basic lifespan. We will become the lonely creatures at the top of creation. Not gods, no, but creative and decisive manipulators of our own genes. The creatures at the pinnacle of evolution, not forged by environment or predetermined makeup. The apes who saw the shackles of their own design and decided to break free of them. We spit in the mouth of creation's rulebook to create our own. We didn't go gently into that good night. We started playing punk rock music and chugging energy drinks. We said, fuck you, I'm going to live. I am aware what I'm saying appears to be conjecture, to put it lightly, which it absolutely is. But I also think it's supported by most of history's technological ascension, and most of my generation's sociological developments. What are dating apps really? Controlled ways to meet people by the user. What is social media really? Controllable advertising. Your life and everything in it is a streamlined advertisement. Controlling emotions through the brain, neurochemically, is an inevitable step I don't think we're ready to do, but we'll probably see by the end of my lifetime. We're already doing it through antidepressants and antipsychotics too. Interesting effects. And we more broadly have been toying around with it with nature's natural drugs since the beginning of man. Just like the ship of Theseus, trying to talk about what is natural when it comes to emotions is an imprecise gamble of people arguing different timeframes that doesn't come down to the crux of the issue yet again. Man's entire history has been forging environments to create more comfortable feelings. Were we not purposely changing our environment when we made fire to comfort us in the cold dark nights? Are we not manipulating our emotions when we watch a sad film, when we laugh at a comedy show, when we scroll through highly edited videos made to cause engagement on our phones, when we drink tea for its calming positive effect, in decoration when we have little plants and muted colors to provide a sense of ease for guests? And yet, despite knowing and saying all of that, there is still this vague feeling that blocking and amplifying emotional regulators and neurochemicals is going over a line, just like replacing the ship itself in the ship of Theseus thought experiment. And it doesn't feel reactionary or propagandized or related to a general fear of change. It feels genuinely pervasive and invasive in a uniquely intimate and grandiose way. This isn't the first time we've played God, but this is the first time we've played God within the toolkit of our own makeup. I know I'm repeating myself, but this internal manipulation is more than just a continuation of our inventive manipulation of nature. It is a redefinition of our essence. And that essence being changed causes a longing for the comfort of the past. We're probably just an eternal nostalgic creature. As an 18-year-old writing this, I miss when my biggest worry in life was whether I should join the Imperials or the Stormcloaks. Now my worries are what industry I want to go into, and whether or not by the end of my lifetime I'll still be human. But also, as an 80-year-old man, I'll probably miss recording this script, having my life ahead of me, having that choice to make and thinking about this. Everything that's daunting right now is everything that's exciting looking back. Similarly, and once again more broadly, modern man in certain aspects may feel envious of primitive man's simplicity, even though primitive man definitely had worries that potentially were greater individually than modern man's. Whether they will have enough food, building adequate shelter to protect themselves from the elements. With that being said, they never had to question their own humanity. They never felt alienated from it. They never had to be as introspective. I don't think primitive man was thinking about earlier versions of itself with a subconscious nostalgia. The primordial soup, those were the days, bro. They were longing, but in reality, they were longing for what we are and have now, for a general surrounding stability, for better rates of survival, and for comfort amidst a hostile world. Our worries and perceptions have evolved alongside our societies and environments, and as we've made our surroundings more comfortable, we've grown more uncomfortable with ourselves. In response to this, we're going to change ourselves instead of the environment this time, as we have done in the past. It's hard to imagine our perception of reality differently, because the only lens we can view the world through is our own. Trying to imagine life without anxiety or fear is almost impossible, and while we can have periods free from it, the subconscious impact it has on how we interact and experience reality, even when we aren't experiencing the emotion, can't be understated. Let's say I have a phobia of dogs. I don't have a phobia of dogs, but let's just say I did. I know the area I'm walking in well, and I feel comfortable and active, and I'm enjoying the scenery. But I also know that up ahead is a dog park. I still feel comfortable, but knowing there are dogs up ahead is making me choose a different path. The fear of feeling fear is subconsciously impacting my decisions in the moment, despite not actually feeling fear. I didn't experience anxiety, but I mapped in my head how to avoid potential anxiety. If these technologies and new drugs come through to put a leash on anxiety itself, it's like an avalanche of recontextualizing everything around us. You're not avoiding anxiety anymore, you're turning it off. You can hug the dogs now, dance with the dogs, steal them from their owners because they look too cute. Your instinctive feeling of anxiety is no longer preventing you from experiencing something. What does that kind of freedom do to the human spirit and a human psyche? Plato's cave becomes Plato's rave. Crazy shit happens. And it's not even just perception, it can be other things as well. It's the repetitious patterns, images, and qualities that are seemingly always there in life. As funny as it sounds, brands like McDonald's and Apple are so ingrained into me throughout advertisements and daily life growing up that it's almost like an expectancy in life that they'll be there. My world won't collapse if they're gone or anything silly like that, but what was a seemingly stable and fixed part of my era of being human, if it was to just one day be gone out of the blue, if the option of purchasing a Big Mac on a road trip was taken from me, life would feel in a way different. Again, as silly as it sounds, there would be a before and after McDonald's time frame in my mind. It would feel like a seismic change. So what happens when we remove instincts from the human psyche that have been with us since creation, a tethering bond between human to human in all shapes and sizes and states? Well, we don't get an answer to my analogy or my analogy's question. We get another question. Are we just our longing? And our anxieties and our instinctual emotions? Is that what makes humanity humanity? If I remove that, am I still human? I think this is a much more daunting and important question than the physicality of humanity changing, and I think it is the question. I'd like to boldly say that the ship of Theseus's material is irrelevant in regards to its identity. It is the perception of the ship of Theseus that makes itself the ship of Theseus. It is our perception of ourselves that makes ourselves. Child me and adult me and elderly me are very different, but all are fundamentally me. I am the ship of Theseus. I'm just as replaced as it, if not more. My body's cells are constantly replicating, creating their own replacements. Me today is different to me tomorrow, because by tomorrow, 330 billion cells will have been changed and replaced within me. The only constant is the change. Change is the only thing that doesn't change. The only thing that has really changed is my perception of myself as myself changes. Was baby me a more definitive version of myself because it's the supposed original? Is elderly me a lesser version of myself because it's the most far removed from the original? In reality, I have been replaced over time with myself, over and over and over and over again. No matter what state I'm in, despair, happiness, psychosis, sadness, euphoria, panic, even numbness, what physically I look like, underweight, overweight, sleep deprived, or normal weight, it is still me. And after thinking about this for a few years, I would say the same thing about posthumanism, transhumanism, the potential of prolonging and an end to longing. There's something I like to listen to sometimes when I feel lost in myself, and I've thought about it a lot while writing this. It's a series of clips of documentary-style interviews with dementia patients, analyzing and showcasing their reactions to music from their era. A lot of them are essentially mute and can't communicate. The ones that can don't understand who they are or have a real understanding of themselves or their own condition. Despite this, when played music like Perry Como or Frank Sinatra or instrumentals popular to their time growing up, they, as the researchers put it, come alive.
Then he is given an iPod containing, we know, his favourite music. And immediately he lights up. His face assumes expression, his eyes open wide. He starts to sing, and to rock and to move his arms, and he's being animated by the music.
And he used to always sit on the unit with his head like this. He didn't really talk to much people. And then when I introduced the music to him, this is his reaction ever since.
The philosopher Kant once called music the quickening art, and Henry is being quickened, he's being brought to life. The effect of this doesn't stop, because when the headphones are taken off, Henry, normally mute and virtually unable to answer the simplest yes or no questions, is quite voluble.
What was your favorite music when you were young?
Well, I guess, Cab Calloway was my number one band guy. I like. They did the holy, the holly, the hilly, the holy, the milly, the holly, the ah.
What's your favorite Cab Calloway song?
Oh, I'll be home there for Christmas. Oh, you can count and plan on me with plenty of snow, mistletoe, present wrapped around your tree. Ow!
So in some sense, Henry is restored to himself. He has remembered who he is, and he's reacquired his identity for a while through the power of music.
It's something so profound and intimate to me that I have trouble writing about it. They don't know who they are, but they are remembering. While consciousness and awareness may fade, the core of who we are, our emotional responses and longings, can remain intact at a subconscious level. A comment under one of the video reads, "My mother was in a care home and dementia had really taken a hold of her. One day I walked in and Moonlight Serenade started playing in the main living room, where all these other souls were around. And I reached out and took my mother's hands and got her on her feet, and I held her tight and we rocked slowly back and forth to the song. She didn't know who I was, but she remembered the music." I've probably milked the ship of Theseus more than any writer in history, but I'm going to do it once again, hopefully for the last time. Identity is not anchored to a single point in time, but evolves as an organism does. Human identity is constantly evolving. Our outline is changing all the time. A modern-day human isn't a definitive version of humanity, and a more primitive version isn't either. It may seem more dramatic when we start doing gene editing, and millions of people are all engineering themselves, but it is still our outline. A problem with philosophy and big questions like these is you can begin to analyze life more than experience it. It's the same with an over-analysis of psychology. People become patterns and explainable causes, predictive behaviors, rather than a living, breathing, conscious person with individual freedom and free will. Our ideas of ourselves begin to overtake the reality of who we are. If my theory is right, and we're closing in on genetic modification, I can't imagine what this is going to be like stretched or extended beyond our typical lifespan. I have a shadow of a muse of an idea of what that feels like through my lifespan, but there's always a vague understanding of an end in my subconscious mind. It is completely unrelatable to me to live knowing there is no definite end. It's unrelatable to imagine a world free of cancer and dementia and failing organs and limited time. Even though I think at one point it could be unrelatable to imagine living with them. Sometimes I imagine what our ancient ancestors must have thought about where this is all going. Obviously they thought short term for the future of their tribe and survival, but did they have an inkling of a vision of where we would end up, of their species' own potential, of the potential we are living out? Regardless, they raised the next generation who raised the next one, who raised the next one. They set up foundations that were built for them higher and higher and higher in a cycle as repetitious as my word choice right now. They were the architects of humanity at that time. They inherited the ship of Theseus and they kept rebuilding it over and over again. And to the generation in the not too distant future, we are the architects of the future that they stand in. We are building the ship of Theseus. We are building humanity. Could you imagine future generations looking back, wondering what it was like for us? This is the eternal nostalgia, the idea I have that humans might always long for the past regardless of advancements. This eternal nostalgia for the past is a balancing force against the relentless march of progress. Feeling time envy, looking at how many generations came after us, how many came before us, looking at how far we've come, looking even more at how far we've yet to go, comparing and contrasting different versions of ourselves, constantly wondering, what if we're the lucky ones?